Hey guys, welcome to the training part of the series that we're working on. And today, super cool, we're actually recording in the WEDU studios in Austin. So a big thank you to Lance for letting us use his studio. And also an even bigger thank you to Dave Bolch, who many people won't actually know, but Dave is the guy behind everything essentially that Lance does. So he's here today helping us with the audio and the camera. So huge thanks to Dave for helping us out with that. And today we're talking to Brant again. So we're going to dig deep into this training. And to get things started, what we really want to start the conversation with is why does somebody need a coach? And I'll tell you quickly why I need a coach.
Yeah.
And you've seen this and you know this by working with me already. But I'm terrible at coaching myself. I mean, I did it for a few months before we kind of got together, and I just do whatever I feel like doing.
Yeah.
I don't really have a structure. If I don't feel like doing a workout, then I won't do it or I'll modify it. But then the other part of that is when I do go out and train, I just redline. Like I'm 0 to 100 because I feel like I've got to do work. I've got to work hard, and I've got to, and that's how I'm going to get better, by making every workout just like a max effort. And so it really became apparent when you started looking at my files and you're like, dude, like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
you
like
just
that,
went out.
like that text the other day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why I need a coach, because I often need somebody to help me with the structure, but also to rein me in, because like I kind of add on stuff, or I feel like I haven't worked enough, so I go out and I do more.
Yeah. Well, that's all of us have that problem. I mean, even I have that problem. I mean, it's one of the, I think it's very difficult for someone to coach themselves, because we all think we're, in some way different from the norm, or the rules don't apply to us, and we can muscle through something, or we can maybe not work as hard, or what have you. But even if you kind of look back and you read about athletes that have been, self-coached in one way or another, they still had a confidant or a consultant or somebody that they bounced ideas off of to get kind of like that affirmation, or that you're doing the right thing, or I maybe you should try and tweak this, or you really need to back off some. So you just have to have that that, I don't know, maybe a discerning eye, or somebody that can kind of doesn't have the emotional attachment to your training that you have, and so they kind of can kind of lay out a little bit more of a plan or a groundwork for you.
And a great example of that is Lionel Sanders. This last year at Kona, like he very openly said that he coached himself. He did all of his own workouts, and he was doing some crazy things building up into Kona. He didn't have a nutritionist. He decided to do his whole race day on Gatorade. That was it.
Oh, wow.
And at Kona, he had a horrible race. Like, he fell apart.
Yeah.
Had a bad swim, couldn't put his normal power down on the bike, and then kind of fumbled through the run.
Mm-hmm.
And so this year, he's thrown that all out the window. Now he's got somebody working on his bike fit. He's talking to people. He's got that accountability.
Good.
So I'm really interested to see how that works for him this year. I assume that it's going to be
I think it would be, yeah.
So another thing that I really want to do with my racing this year, and that I've struggled with in the past, is that I've shown up to my big races, my A race, and I've felt like, man, if only had I done just a little bit more. I've always felt like I've never quite reached my potential. And so this year, I know I kind of brought you in a little last minute in terms of the race in Galveston.
Right.
But I feel like even with the couple of weeks that we've been doing, that I'm heading in the right direction, and I feel like I have a structure, I have a plan, and that I will be ready for that race.
Yeah, because what's that race is, we're still there. There it is. It's April 7th.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're 8 weeks out. So you still have like 2 months, which is a lot of time. And we've been doing stuff for about 4 weeks now, 5 weeks now, something like that.
Yeah, and before that, I had
I
had a base.
Yeah, you had fitness.
I'd been doing some stuff. So okay, so let's start this topic with how do you approach a new customer or client when they come to you? Obviously, people who are looking for a coach will typically have a race or a goal in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where do you begin?
My biggest thing when I'm working with somebody new is I like to get a sense of what their daily life is like, or weekly life is like. What kind of stresses do they have? Are they married and, with no kids? Are they married with kids? Are they, do they have a full-time job? Is it more than full-time job? Are they like, doing a startup, whatever it is, or do they have a really free and relaxed schedule, and like their athletic endeavors are their kind of like their primary goals right now? Because, I mean, as much as we would all want to be able to train like, a professional cyclist or a professional triathlete, in reality, we don't have that kind of time. And if you force that kind of time on top of your work and family commitments, and you're just going to stress yourself out and burn the candle on both ends. So I really like to get a sense of what they do, their job, what kind of personality they have, what things have worked for them, they feel have worked for them in the past, what they feel their strengths are and what their weaknesses are, because it might be different than when we get into working than it actually is. So I normally spend a bit of time talking with them, and then kind of getting to know them over the first few weeks of working with them, just to kind of see their plans. And then of course, what are their goals? What are they trying to work towards? A lot of folks that I've worked with in the past, they get real nervous about a lot of structure. Most folks, from a cyclist standpoint, they like riding, so they want to ride as much as they can. It's their social outlet. They ride with their friends or their boyfriends or their girlfriends or what have you, and to them that's great. But then they also have this desire of doing a race, and they have great fitness compared to the average individual, but it's all helter-skelter. There's no format, and so for that individual, it's just a matter of kind of tweaking their riding so that they get that plan or that structure in. Because, you might have spent, on a 3-hour ride, and you may have spent 40 minutes in your riding tempo, but it was 5 minutes there, a minute here, it was all interspersed, and you pushed up hard on some hill, so you really, during the middle of that, and then you took a break. And so it's, whereas maybe you got 2 20-minute tempo efforts steady, that is just a matter of kind of tweaking it a little bit.
And so like this happened to me Tuesday. I went out on my normal group ride. You would give me an easy day ride, or an easy ride day. So I went out on this group ride, which is typically, it's a quicker group ride, but I figured I could sit in. But this particular day, it was really windy, and a couple of guys decided they want to, stretch the legs. So next thing you know, these guys are pushing 450 watts on the front, where I'm supposed to be riding at under 200 watts for my easy ride. And so in that case, that group ride probably wasn't the best choice, and sometimes you have to sacrifice those things to really focus and get the workout that you need to have that day.
Yeah. I mean, you do. I mean, it stinks. I mean, there's a difference between riding and training, or running and training, or you can go for a ride and that's enjoyable, but when you train for something, you have purpose behind what you do, whether it's a harder day or endurance day, medium type day, or whether it's a recovery day. There's a reason for it. And that's to help boost your performance down the road.
Okay, so how do you start to structure your program for each athlete in terms of like monthly and then weekly and daily? Is there, you hear a lot about zone 2 training in the off season
Mm-hmm.
and periodization and things like that. Talk us through how you would prepare, from a few months out.
Yeah, I think the key to remember is that everybody's different and behaves differently to different types of training, and then depending on, again, what they're getting ready for, you're gonna have a totally different plan. A crit racer who has a really good sprint is going to train different than a half marathon runner, and they're going to train different than a half Ironman athlete. So you kind of have to tailor. There's no one like formula for that kind of will blanket all the athletes. So you definitely have to figure out, well, what is their event? And so, somebody who's maybe like in your situation, getting ready for a half Ironman, some of the key things to remember is, well, it's a very long, steady effort. So you're really not going to go over your threshold a whole heck of a lot. Maybe if it's on a hilly course and you have a hillier section, a section where you have a 5 or 10 minute type hill, maybe. But for the most part, you're going to be kind of in your, that upper zone 2 heart rate range, tempo, zone 3 tempo type range, maybe at times low threshold. But you should stay under threshold. So we're going to work a lot on those zones, because your body doesn't, you're not born with those zones. You don't know, your body doesn't know, oh, I'm at 65% of my threshold, or I'm now at 88% of my threshold. It doesn't know that out of the basket. You got to develop that. You got to spend time there. And I think that's where a lot of people get in trouble is, they know easy and hard, because that's what they do all the time. Like when you're out riding, you're like, oh, or running, man, I'm getting a good workout in. Your heart rate's up. You're breathing fairly heavily. You're kind of feeling that, euphoric feeling of exercising, and you're kind of pushing it, and you've got some song looped in your head, and you're just kind of grooving to it. And then you rest, you either stop or you walk, or, same thing like when you're doing track intervals, at the track, you have your on interval and then you have your recovery. And a lot of times when people do their recovery, they don't jog, they walk. And so now you're kind of teaching your body that you have your hard race type effort, and then you have your walking effort, and there's no zones in between there, no breadth of zones in between there. And that's where the training comes in, is we have to spend time in those different ranges, to develop those ranges. So it's important when you do a 2-hour ride or a 3-hour ride that you're riding in that zone 2 type range. So, in that, 60, 65%, maybe 70%, kind of depending on what numbers you're using to build your zones, but, range of your power. Or maybe, if you're basing it off a heart rate, you might be at like 65 to 75% for your heart rate. I mean, it's, you can kind of look up the different zones depending on who what kind of sport physiologist or scientist you want to use for zones. And you can kind of back calculate what you should be at, but you have to spend time in that zone in order to develop that zone. So if you're a heart rate based athlete and find that your threshold's at 155 beats per minute, well, for endurance riding, then you need to be riding at or running at, let's say riding, you need to be riding at 105, 115 heart rate. And a lot of people are like, I can't ride that slow at that low of a heart rate. And it's because you don't have that zone. You have to develop it. So you have to spend time there. And so you might have to find a really flat ride, or your trainer, and just ride that easily. But over time you'll develop it, and you'll develop the ability to produce power there. Same with running. Running's going to be kind of skewed up a little bit, but you might if you can't run at 130 or 145 beats per minute without going really, really slow, again, it's because you have to develop that ability to run there.
And so that zone development, typically you're going to do that in off season or quite a ways out.
Well, yeah. I mean, anytime, honestly, if we're going to get into that development is always going on. Like if you were to start riding at 35, if you're properly training your zone 2, you'll be a stronger rider at 40 than you would be at 35. And you may, again, depending on how much you're riding on a weekly basis, you might even be stronger at 45 than you were at 40. It just takes time to develop that. Anybody that's kind of new, like if we're just talking about cyclists for a second right now, which this does transfer over to triathletes as too, but any time, I tell most folks is like, yeah, you'll improve this year, but your real improvement is, if you stick with it, is 2 and 3 years from now. Because it just takes time to develop that aerobic capacity and ability to be strong and produce, for a cyclist power, or for a runner to run that pace at a low heart rate, because you have to be disciplined for it.
And so when do you start bringing in your other zones? When do you start working on speed, like specifically when you're gearing towards a race?
Again, it depends on the distances that you're covering. But, like for you, you had some fitness in, so we were able to kind of just jump right into a little bit of intensity. Again, that's mostly tempo and threshold type work. I think in an ideal world, like if you were targeting a race in April, you would probably start doing some of that stuff in January, early January. Nothing too intense, but you're starting to kind of add it in, maybe a couple days a week. 3-4 months out, and then you kind of are going to have a couple blocks of training. Again, everybody can handle different loads, so maybe it's a 2-week block, maybe you do a 10-day block, maybe it's you take a short break and you do it again. So you might have in total a 3-week period where you're kind of hitting some decent training with some rest, a little bit longer rest sections in there, and then you might take a recovery week or 10 days, and then you kind of do another 2 or 2.5, 3 week focus kind of build.
So I guess like your weekly training is going to look different depending on how far out you are from your event.
Yeah.
But with the triathlon specifically, you don't want to go out and be doing like speed work on your swim and then do a speed work on your run workout and then another speed work on the bike, all on the same week. So how do you lay out those 3 different disciplines?
So from a triathlete, everybody's kind of got their one event that's like their best event, right? Some people it's for swim, if they're ex-swimmers, or they just really have the technique. Some are more natural on the bike or the run. And then I think generally speaking is one, there's always a discipline that needs the most work, right? For me, when I kind of dabbled, it was always to swim. I ran in college, and then I took up the bike pretty naturally. Generally, I feel like if you're a good runner, you can kind of transition to the bike pretty quickly. It doesn't necessarily always go the same way where a cyclist makes a really good runner. I think, and then likewise, I think if you're a good swimmer, you tend to be a good cyclist, but maybe not necessarily a good runner. It's just kind of, I think, the way that people are made up. But I think the big key is you only have so much time and you can only recover so much in that period of time. So if you're somebody who's training, you got a full-time job and you can train 10 hours a week, that's kind of what you're allotted between all your disciplines. Well, 1 week might be more swim focused, another week might be more run focused, or you might spend a couple weeks, especially like if you're not the best of runners, further out from your event, you might kind of spend more time running every week to kind of get those miles under your legs. Same with cycling, or swimming for that matter. So the further out you are, the more time you're probably going to spend on your weaker event or discipline. And then as you get closer to the event, you might start transitioning to where you're sharpening up on the stuff that you are really good at. But from a weekly standpoint, I kind of tend to follow like, okay, you have, one threshold workout. And if this week it's the run, then you're really not doing much of a threshold workout on your bike or your swim, maybe. You might depending on cycling, you can kind of get away with a little extra work. Maybe you do 2 tempo rides during the week, but those are your tempo workouts. You're not going to necessarily do a tempo run that week per se. So next week it might be flip-flopped. You might do 1 or 2 threshold workouts on the bike, and you have a tempo run that you're going to follow. It's different for somebody who has a lot of time recovering. You can kind of push the envelope and kind of go to the edge a little bit more. But I tend to kind of focus on, we have 3 real key workouts: a tempo, a threshold workout, and then a really long workout, whether that's a run or a bike workout.
And so that brings us into the communication between the athlete and the coach. And so we're using Training Peaks, and many coaches use Training Peaks as the platform. And that is where you get to see how my workout went. You can see my heart rate, my power numbers. And that's one of the key components for you, because you can read that, you see what happened, see where I did wrong, correct me if I need correction, and then also adjust the plan accordingly.
Yeah, I like it. It's a good. They put a lot of data. It's real data driven. I can really look kind of at the actual file. So let's here's Saturday's ride that you did, and I think no matter what you do or who you work with, the communication between the athlete and coach is the most important. Like, you can upload all the data files you want, and I can read it, and I can see, oh, okay, yeah, your heart rate and power seem to be correlated, or your heart rate and pace seem to be correlating really well on your runs or what have you. But if you don't tell me that, oh, man, I felt awesome today, or, oh, man, I don't know, I was really off today, I don't know what was going on, or I'm just really tired. I mean, if you don't give me any feedback on how you're feeling, it almost, I don't want to say the data is worthless, but you just don't get nearly as much out of it as you could. So no matter who's coaching you, it's really important to at least say, felt awesome, or today sucked, or write a novel. I have a couple athletes. I mean, it literally takes me a long time to read through their diary entries, so to speak. But it really helps with the mindset of knowing who you're working with too. So.
And you can get pretty specific on Training Peaks. Like, you could put in your weight. You can put in how much you slept that night. Mm-hmm. And those things can have a bearing on, obviously, your workout as well. So
for sure.
It's pretty important to keep track of those things when you're training hard.
Yeah. But yeah, like you were like, legs felt the same as last week, which you were kind of complaining about them being tired, and then lacking high-end power, easy cruise with a bunch for 36 miles with some go zones, and then rode last 16 miles at steady state on my own. Felt fine spinning at 2 to 220 watts. So I was like, oh, interesting. But then you had shot me that note that you were kind of tired and you didn't know if you should do your long run the next day. And I'm kind of like, well, you didn't do anything. You weren't supposed to do anything hard. Why are you tired? And then I look at your file and I was like, what the hell? It was like, what the flip are you doing, dude?
And so my excuse for that was that the ride was a slower ride. It was taking a little bit longer than I had anticipated, and I really wanted to meet the family for lunch. So I kind of solo time trialed off the front to make it home in time for lunch.
Yeah.
For 45 minutes.
Yeah. 48 minutes. Yeah. So, you averaged like, and this is kind of a good example. So that was at about 2.5 hours into your ride, 2.5 hours into your ride. And you averaged, let me pull it up here. So you were at, you averaged base off, and this would probably lead us into some other discussions that you want to have, but you, for your power, averaged in tempo, zone 3. After 2.5 hours of riding, you went into tempo. Well, so, and the goal was to be zone 2 the whole time. So that was the first kind of fail, which I understand it. Stuff happens. But then after 2 hours of riding, your threshold isn't the same as it was in the first hour. Your thresholds, if you're not like some really disciplined, seasoned athlete, your threshold's dropping as you're going on.
And that's something I'd never considered, to be honest.
So you were probably, even though you're technically riding tempo, you're in mid zone 3, you're kind of like your tempo range, you were probably riding closer to your actual threshold at that time. So your threshold had fallen from probably, 265 watts to maybe, we don't know, but guessing maybe it was 240, so you're starting to kind of get into your threshold zone for those last 40 minutes. And so, yeah, your legs felt like crap the next day.
Because I didn't stick to the workout plan.
Yeah. You pushed it.
And that's one thing that I think is really important. You need to be able to trust that the coach is creating a plan for you that, is what you need to be doing.
Yeah.
And you need to stick to it.
Yeah. You're doing a half Ironman. You don't need to be doing VO2 sprint intervals or 200-meter sprints at the track. Yeah, that's great to have that kind of leg speed, but when are you going to reach those power levels on the bike or that speed on running, in a half Ironman?
Yeah.
You're not. If you are, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about FTP real quick, because that's something that perhaps not everyone is aware of what FTP is and why you need it. And so talk about that, and then we'll talk about how my FTP test went.
Yes. I think what I would say is there's kind of multiple ways they've kind of come out with multiple ways to calculate a threshold. And so specifically you're kind of talking about FTP, which is functional threshold power. And I think the key to remember is when you talk about FTP is the default for most people is like for either an hour or 20 minutes, right? But it could be anything. You could have a 30-minute FTP, you could have a 3-hour FTP. And then how you use that data to determine training zones kind of can dictate a lot. So, you could almost use any number you want, like any duration you wanted to, but kind of have a sense of how you're going to extrapolate that data and interpret it. I think a lot of times people confuse their FTP with their LT, their lactate threshold, and those can be very different. So for the sake of our conversation, I think most people have access to doing an FTP test, which typically is you can either do an hour hard.
And it's a max effort test.
Yeah, you're trying to be done at an hour. It doesn't mean go out and go as hard as you can from the get-go. You have to pace yourself, but you're basically wanting to be done at the end of the duration. So you could do an hour, which is horrible. So a lot of people tend to do a 20-minute test, and then they take maybe 8%, 8-10% off of that, their average heart rate and their average power, and they use that to kind of calculate what their training zone should be.
And a lot of things like Wahoo, for example, if you have a kicker trainer, they have FTP tests as a default in some of their settings, don't they? So you can get on your trainer and do an FTP test.
Yeah, I think so. Like Trainer Road, Zwift, I think does it. I think Wahoo has it as well, where you can go through what they would call a 20-minute test, where you might go through a warm-up period, and then you go into doing the actual effort.
And that FTP number is where you're going to build your training program from, right?
The percentage you take off of that.
Yeah. Okay.
So typically what I do with a lot of folks is I take about, if they're doing an FTP test, I take 8% off. So 92% of that average is what we look at. But you kind of have to look at the file too. If you know, if someone was real skittish and they went out really easy the first 5 minutes and then they just totally blew the doors off of it and they crushed it the last 15 minutes, you know, I might cut out that first 5 minutes. You know, likewise, if they kind of went, you know, really hard, you know, and I'll kind of ask them, you know, what was their perceived effort of it, you know. I've seen guys, you know, kind of touch into lactate threshold. I've seen guys that have, you know, a lactate threshold of 250 watts, but they've done a 20-minute test where they averaged 315 watts. I mean, that's somebody who you wouldn't take just 8% off of. You would take quite a bit off of. So, you know, like a true way of getting to know where somebody's fitness level is doing a lactate threshold test, but not everybody has access to that.
That's when you're pricking the finger, you're drawing blood, measuring that
lactate
buildup of lactic acid.
Yeah, you'll record their heart rate and their power and the lactate level.
But like you said, that can be pricey, and not everyone has access to that. So an FTP test is a good, you know, it's a good basis to start from if that's what you have.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yep. You just got to be cognizant. You know, you want to, and that's where having a coach helps, right? Because if you do 2 or 3 weeks and you're training off of this FTP number, that let's say we took 8% off, and you're feeling pretty worked over, there's a good chance that you just have a real high lactate tolerance, and you're way over your threshold, even with 8%, taking that 8% off. So you might have to take 10 or 15% off, you know, kind of fine tune it a little bit. And again, that's where having the feedback coming back in helps with that.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, that's just a number. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't mean that you suck at cycling or if it's lower. Like for me, mine was substantially lower than it's been in the past, and I kind of got a little hung up on that number. I was a little bit bummed because I know what I could do back in the glory days.
Yeah.
But it's just a number to work from. It's not, you know.
Yeah, it just helps you get the most out of yourself for what you can do at that time. You know, I mean, I think that's the best way to put it. I'm not going to go out and train at the numbers that I used to train at. There's no way. I'd blow up. It'd be this little. I'd just keep going and find a hole to lay down in. You know, it's not going to happen. But yeah, it's a number to help you get the most out of where you're at today, and then and hopefully you improve, and then you get a new number. You know, so there's nothing to say that you are stuck at that threshold for the foreseeable future. You know, it could change especially if you're just getting back into it. It might bump up 10% in 3 weeks, 4 weeks if you haven't really been doing anything. So, you know, there's reasons to test again. You just don't want to test too much because then you're not training. You know, it's kind of like what I said the other day. If you're always taking tests, when do you learn? You know, you got to put the work in. So.
And so I did my FTP test a couple of weeks back when we started writing the training program, and my FTP was 280 watts.
Mm-hmm.
And
or your average was 280 watts.
Yeah. So we're gonna do a couple of months of training, and then we'll retest.
Yeah.
A little bit before race day.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested to see.
Yeah, I think. We've gone that test was. That test was threshold test was on January 11th. So honestly, so next week is about 4 weeks, or we're right at 4 weeks. So yeah, I would say we'd probably do another one in about 2 weeks' time. You know, a little bit, maybe a week to 10 days before your Olympic try.
Okay.
And
sounds
then,
good.
And then,
or sounds terrible.
And then you can
whichever way you want
train
to
off of those numbers until the big race.
All right, that sounds like a plan. Now, one thing that I have done in the past, which I'm really very eager to avoid this year, is overtraining. Mm-hmm. And like I said, the way that I used to train is probably the reason for that. I used to go out, and Strava was a bit problematic for me because I would go out and you have KOMs and you really want to, you know where the segment is. You want to see how quick you can do it. So I was going out and every ride would be, KOM hunting or I had an average speed in my mind that I wanted to, impress my followers with and things like this. And I buried myself in training. And I didn't feel like I was training much.
Well, you weren't. You're racing.
I was racing.
You're racing every ride.
Racing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, well, like I said, Strava is the Instagram of training. I mean, Strava's cool. I like it. I like a lot of the features, but when you ride with Strava, you never ride alone, or any kind of thing like that. Cliche quote or whatever you want to say, but I like how you can find people. I like the rides that you can do, and but everybody's out there. They want their kudos. They're trying to show that they're I guess it's it's always a competition, and it's like nobody's comfortable with training, and training's not glamorous, just like my vacation's probably not as good as it looks on Strava or on Instagram. It's all doctored to a certain degree.
And I had problems with my ego, to be honest. Like going out and doing a run where I tried to keep my heart rate at 120 beats. I'm running 9-minute miles, and I'm kind of like, I don't want people to see, I don't want people to know that I can run a 6-minute mile.
Yeah. Well, you can. You show them that when you're at the race, when you go past them.
But my ego, it was getting in the way, and it, you see what happened. This is 2015 was the last year that I kind of did some heavy training and attempted some racing, and I fell apart in the middle of the season. I had some terrible performances. I just couldn't reach those peaks in my race day. Yeah. And I think a lot of it was because I was training incorrectly. And another thing that you touched on when we first started talking was outside stresses and how they can actually affect your your training. So for me, like my wife was traveling a lot, and so we have 2 kids. So my training, I was getting in at, after I'd put the kids to bed, I'd done the dishes, cleaned up, got some laundry started. I would jump on the trainer at 9:30. Mm-hmm. I'd ride for an hour and a half, and then you get off, and you got to bring it back down a little. And I was going to bed at midnight and then getting up at 5:30 the next morning to start the day again.
Yeah exactly. And that's where you have to be careful with like Training Peaks is really cool with how you can organize your training, and again kind of like reviewing training and things like that. And I think what a lot of people get hung up on is they kind of want to watch what they call their CTL, or their critical training load, chronic training load. Sorry, not enough coffee this morning. But it's kind of like a formula equation that they use to calculate your fitness, and then you have your training stress scores for your workouts, and then you calculate your training stress balance, and that kind of helps to tell you what kind of form you're rounding in, and that's great for kind of like using as confirmation of your training. But I tell people pretty much point blank when we start work, I don't rely on those. I don't train to those numbers, because they're a great tool if you're not necessarily well versed in training philosophies and protocols. So it helps to kind of give a mathematical equation of how to train and how to kind of assess your training. But we're like living organisms, and you can put A and B in and get C one time, and you get, big fat F the next time, so we just don't respond to the same workouts every time the same way. And if you did that workout at 8:00 in the morning, and then you had the day to kind of recover and eat after your workout, and then you got the kids to bed, and then you went straight to bed at 9:00 and you slept until 6 a.m., well, you're going to recover from that workout a hell of a lot quicker than you did at, we're doing it and finishing it at 10:30 at night, and then going to bed at midnight and waking up in 5 hours, And a lot of that stuff doesn't make it into these equations. So, that's, again, one, where feedback's really important. Yeah. But 2 is to know the stress balance. And I know that if I'm working with somebody who owns their own business and they're kind of always working, let's say, they work from home and there's no real 9 to 5 and they get kind of hung up on a project and then they feel like, oh, I got to get this workout in, and I got to hit these zones. Yeah, they do it, but they should have just passed on it, or whatever. And so trying to be like, okay, here are your few critical workouts this week. We need to get these in. If it's on a Monday or a Tuesday for one of them, that's fine. Flip-flop your days. If it's Wednesday or Thursday for the other, flip-flop your days as needed. And then that just kind of gets them more subdued and like, oh, okay, I got my work in when I could. And it kind of just tends to, that stress and that inflammation kind of subsides. So you have to be flexible with your training, especially if you're not getting paid to race, which not many of us are. And then 2 is, there are things that are a little bit more important than our racing, and if we don't get, if we all don't, make it to the next big step, that's okay. Let's just get out of it the most we can get out of it. I think that's a pretty important concept to hold on to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I know when I raced my best was when I stopped really worrying about what kind of results I was getting. And I actually raced better when I was less and not as great a shape. So when I was training 10 or 12 hours a week versus 16, 18 hours a week, I was getting better results. One was I was more experienced, but 2 was I think it kind of freed me up to not worry about this, I gotta do well at this race to be able to go do well at that race, or for somebody to notice me or do that. I mean, who cares really?
And see, for my half Ironman, I have a number in my head of time that I've kind of been hung up on, and I'm starting to realize that I need to just let that go.
Yeah.
And just go on race day. Yeah. And formulate my plan. Yeah. And execute it.
Yeah, focus on having good transitions and not going too hard on the swim so that you can have a good bike leg and then ultimately a good run leg, or not going out of the gate too hard on the bike again so you can finish strong but have enough time or enough energy to have a good run,
And so that brings me to execution on race day. So as a coach, you're going to watch my development over the next couple of months. We're going to you'll know what my FTP is, what my training load is. You're going to obviously get my speed up. We're going to taper for race day. Come race day, when the gun goes off, we'll have a plan in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people will have like a power number that they want to hit on the bike. They go out on the bike, they've got this very formulated plan. I'm going to hold this many watts for this much of the race, and then I'm going to ramp it up. In my second half, I'm going to, hit this power number. I'm going to run at this pace. How do you view like execution on race day? Is it obviously the problem with that kind of theory is that if you're not on those marks, that's going to mess with you mentally on your race plan. So how would you recommend people actually approach race day?
Well, I would like to think that, by the time you get to that part of your your season, you've got a pretty good understanding of where you're at. Like, I mean, somebody who really pays attention to their, their training and their bodies. I mean, you don't just haphazardly learn how to run a certain pace or ride at a certain wattage or swim a certain pace. You know that rhythm, and that's what your training's been there for, is that you can kind of fall into that kind of that execution. But I think some of it too is like knowing, again, the athlete. If I know that there's a good chance that this person, in the last 3 races, they've gone out too hard on the bike. They always go out too hard on the bike. So with them, I might say, listen, I'll give them a number to maybe aim for, whether it's heart rate or power, but I might be lowballing him a little bit, like, maybe 5-10%, because I know they're going to go 5 to 10% over the target, and at least it kind of pulls them back a little bit. So you kind of have to play it by feel. With messing with people, again, I think it kind of comes down to is the individual. Some people get really hung up on it, and then they start just panicking. So again, that kind of monster would kind of rear its head in earlier races, and I might just say, you know what? Don't look at your power. Just look at heart rate. Don't worry about hitting a certain power number, but let's keep you within this range for your heart rate. And that's kind of sometimes a lot easier for people to do on races, because your power is always bouncing around, but your heart rate you can kind of keep pretty they So, and then other people, again, if I feel like they're really experienced and maybe they have a chance of doing really well, winning their age group or winning the race or what have you, I might not tell them don't even worry about the numbers. Just go off of feel. They know what they should be feeling like. They know what their exertion should feel like for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours, and just go off of feel. It kind of reminds me, just by chance, one of the athletes that I work with, he did a 12-hour race this past weekend, and on the bike, and he normally does 24-hour races, and he's done some 500 milers, and he's done a 1,000 miler. And when he started, we were very much holding him back, because he kind of came from a road race mentality, and he just wanted to blow the doors off of people and then just settle in. And that worked for a little bit, and then it did not work a lot. So, we really put the brakes on him, like when he would go out. And so it would be like, listen, you just got to let these people go. They're all going hard. And it was like, especially like there was one race I remember was a 400 miler out in West Texas, the No Country for Old Men. And it was a tailwind to start. And I mean, people were rocket ships. I was like, these people realize they have 400 miles to do. And I mean, they had been going 25, 26 miles an hour. And I get it. It was a slight downhill, pretty strong tailwind as they're riding
feeling fresh.
Yeah, feeling fresh. They're all arrowed out. And Andrew was just kind of plodding along, But what we knew, and I assume other people knew this too, but they just had a different mentality of how they were going to accomplish it, is when anything's like out and back or a loop, you always spend more time in the headwind than you do the tailwind, right? You're going slower, so you got to spend more time there. And so that's where you make more time or lose more time on people. And so we wanted to be as fresh as possible when we got to the headwind section. And then, I think he was behind by like 15 or 20 minutes, if I remember, while we were going through Big Bend. And then we turned around and we started heading up to Marathon, and he just started reeling people in because they were at a crawl. They couldn't put any power down anymore. So that was a great example of when to hold back because of the circumstances, the wind. Likewise, this past weekend, he stepped down to do a 12-hour race, and we're stepping down to 12 hours so we can get faster at 24 hours. So,
okay. All right.
And so we were debating on whether to try a tactic, because he's hoping to do some bigger races later in the season. It's like, well, do we go out hard and then settle in, or do we try and build as the race goes on? And so we decided that we were going to build into this one. And about 40 miles into his 12-hour event, which he ended up covering 240 or 250 miles, his power meter crapped out on him. So he didn't have power anymore. And so it was about 3 hours left in his event, 3.5 hours, and I texted him. He gets his text notifications on a Garmin. And I was like, all right, time to pick it up. and he was like, there's just no way. He didn't think he could, but he's like, I'll give it a try. And his last 3 hours were his fastest 3 hours. So, and again, we don't know what he did. We know that when his power meter died, he averaged 190, 195 watts. So obviously it went up from there because he was getting faster. But again, it's kind of like that. I think if he had the meter on, he would have been like, I can't average any more than this. He was probably over 200, I think, for his average, is my guess. And he's like, this is the highest I've averaged for 12 hours. I can't do any more. But he probably lifted it up quite a bit after that, maybe to 215, 220. So I guess.
So I guess so I have the Rotor power meter crankset on my bike, and I've only had it for a few weeks, and it's a great training tool. As a coach, it's obviously pretty important for you to have some sort of metrics to work with so that you can, prepare and you can evaluate what an athlete's doing. But I have also seen in the mountain bike world, like a lot of races, they just don't even put their SRM or their whatever, their Garmin, or whether it's a Wahoo they're recording with, they just don't even put the head unit on. Because they don't need to know those.
Yeah, well, training's training and racing's racing. It's different, especially if you're an elite mountain bike rider or time trialist or at anything. Like, if you're competitive, you got to be with the race. And if the race is going up the road, you don't really give a rat's ass what your power meter's saying. You got to get get up the road or up the trail or whatever. When I was racing, I never looked at a power meter when I was racing. So
just perceived exertion.
Yeah, perceived exertion. Like on all my 40K time trials, I would look at my heart rate every once in a while, especially if I was racing like at a different elevation than what I was used to. So I would make sure I didn't go too far into the red, because at elevation it's hard to, you got to really come back down to catch your breath. So, but yeah, I never looked at my power meter when I was racing. But again, I've been training since I was 15 years old, so I kind of know what my perceived exertion should be for a period of time.
Interesting.
Yeah, but some people, they can't do that. That's where having the metrics helps them to pace themselves in a race. And like when I ran, I had a wristwatch. I would know what my mile split was or my half mile split. As I went through the mile markers in a race. But yeah, you have a mile to figure it out, and you would rather come through 10 seconds too slow than 5 seconds too fast, if you were doing a 10K, so you real quickly learn the pace. And that's, again, what goes back to your training is like, all right, I'm riding tempo. I know this is going to be the effort level that I have to put out during my race. What do I feel like? What's my heart rate at tempo? What's my breathing rate like? What does my body feel like? And you kind of become in tune with that effort level.
Yeah, but you need to and that's where I found it really great to have the power meter, is that I can see, I'm riding at 170 watts. My heart rate is this at this power output. I know what zone that is. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's been really interesting to have that data.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of guesswork out. You get your immediate feedback when you're training with power. Where heart rate lags a little bit. You can still get good training with heart rate, but the power meter helps take it to another level.
And do you like to see those two numbers?
Yeah.
Heart rate and power?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because one is it helps like with your longer rides as far as your pacing, and you can measure, how much somebody's kind of decoupling during their workout. And power's dropping and heart rate's coming up, so you can kind of see how they're you kind of can have like these decoupling scores about where they're at in the first half and the second half of the ride, and I also see how quickly someone recovers from during an interval workout. Like, again, okay, you did 5 minutes here and then recovery, 5 minutes and then recovery, but if you're somebody whose heart rate's staying elevated the whole time, you hit the power numbers, but you're way too far into the red. You're not recovering. Your body isn't strong at recovering. We need to get that heart rate to drop. So we either need to play with not going as hard during the hard effort, or we might need to really back off the first minute or two of your recovery so that you do get that heart rate to start dropping. So, when I always talk about somebody being a strong rider or a strong athlete, that's somebody who, when they do effort, they hit their mark, whether it's power or pace, and their heart rate responds real quickly, and it comes up and it levels off. And then as soon as they drop on their effort, their heart rate starts to drop and they start recovering. And you kind of brought up that scenario of a runner who at 9-minute pace, their heart rate was like 151, and then at like 7-minute pace or 7:40 pace, it was like 156. And it's hard to say. I was kind of thinking about that. It's, that could be like his low heart. Maybe that's low for him, and he has a really high heart rate. And so he does have a really strong zone. But I also think that when somebody like that, maybe his max heart rate's 165 and he's running really close to his max all the time, and he doesn't have the ability to recover. Somebody who can't recover, they just, whenever that effort drops off, or they go down a hill, or they catch a tailwind or a draft, their heart rate's still staying elevated. Their body's not flushing lactate. It's not recovering. So that kind of goes back to that whole low zone training, to be able to get that drop. And that's what I would call a strong rider or strong runner, someone who gets that quick drop down, regardless of what power or pace they're riding or running at. That when they back off, their heart rate immediately starts to come down and follows their power, and is kind of congruent with their power. That's a strong athlete.
And so as we move towards race day, so I've got a couple of kind of test races. Like you were saying, you train for training and you race on race day.
Mm-hmm.
We don't race in training, but you do need these markers to see how your training's going.
Yeah, for sure.
So I have Olympic Tri coming up.
Yeah.
3 weeks. I'm pretty sure it is. About
3 weeks. Yeah.
And then another couple of weeks after that, an Xterra.
Yeah.
Just to, and those are my two, I guess, warm-up races, just to make sure that, we're hitting our marks and things like that.
Yeah, and two is to get the race jitters out of you. You don't want to go into your big race having done any kind of race. You need to practice your transitions. You need to practice, what foods are working for you. You need to, your routine, if you have a little warm-up routine, or the routine of just getting your stuff together the night or 2 days before and having it ready. You got to go through all that stuff. That's all part of executing and having a good result. Is, again, keeping that stress level low leading into an event. And that you get that by practice. You got to practice getting ready for an event, just like you'd have to practice training for an event. So,
Cool. Well, I think that covers all of my questions that I had. I think we got through everything.
Good.
So basically, to summarize, get a coach.
I would highly recommend it. I would definitely recommend it.
Communicate with your coach is probably one of the biggest factors in terms of making that relationship work.
Yeah, and be honest to your coach. Your coach is spending time, and if he or she is a good coach and they're giving you good workouts, you're doing them a disservice not doing the workouts. I always tell people that I work with is, if you do the workouts and you don't get any better, that's my fault. I've failed you as a coach. But if you don't do the workouts that I wrote and then you have a bad race or something, it's kind of on you, It's and again, if it's my fault, we'll tweak things. We'll figure it out, But again, if you're not, I'm only going to wag my finger at you so many times, and then it's going to be like, we kind of got an issue here.
Yeah, you've got to trust that what the coach is doing is right.
Yeah.
You got to do the workouts as prescribed,
yeah.
not start ad-libbing stuff on because you think you know better.
Yeah, and if you communicate with your coach and for whatever reason it's not working, then you go and you got to find somebody who works. As much as I would love to coach a ton of people, there's some personalities that aren't going to like me, or I'm not going to like, or styles of athletes that might not be a good meld. And you got to find the person that gets the best out of you. So I think that's something to remember too.
All right. Well, we're going to link Brant's info in the description of this video as well. So if you want to get in touch with Brant and talk training with him, contact information will be below. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, I hope we do it again sometime.
Yeah, thanks
It was fun.
again, Lance, for letting us use this awesome place. Thanks to Dave standing behind the camera for putting it all together. And I don't even know what the next episode is yet. I don't think we've planned that. I think we might be moving into run biomechanics coming up soon.
Oh, that'd be good.
And we're going to do that with Run Lab.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Some gait analysis.
I like that.
So, yeah.
Do they help you? You should have them help pick out shoes.
I think that is part of the service, actually. Yeah, they definitely point you towards the shoes that you should be running in. That's how I ended up running in the shoes that I have. Yeah. Actually, they put me on a pair of shoes when I was suffering with Achilles tendonitis. So, anyway, that coming up and more coming soon. So, thanks. Subscribe to the channel and follow along. And we'll see you in the next episode.